morning, everybody, and welcome into ClaibsOnline.com. This is the two-man game with Bob Ramsey and Matthew Rocc. We're here to talk a little St. Louis basketball. Rammer's just got a little bit of time before he's got to head off to the GW game as he is in D.C., so we're going to dive right in. Before we do, though, I do have to say, Rammer, good morning, good afternoon where you are, or almost afternoon, I should say. How are you doing today? Oh. Rammer, you are muted for some reason. I'm not sure why.
There
we go.
Yeah, the team came up. The Billikens came up Thursday, and we're getting ready for the GW game. Coming off the Mason game earlier in the week, so the Bills play the Georges back to back, and see if they can keep it going a little bit, trying to win on the road.
It's also a very patriotic twofer. You have the Patriots and the Colonials. It's a very patriotic twofer for the Billikens.
Yeah, and you will feel especially patriotic if we can get the win.
Let's dive into the first win over the Patriots. That was a 63-62 win, very close, very obviously charged game with the ejection of Travis Ford, the comeback win for the Billikens in the last few minutes. I didn't want to get your thoughts on a couple of big things. Obviously, the fouls and that stuff has been talked about a lot, so I kind of want to bypass that because I think we all know what your reaction was to the non-call on Oduro, but that does bring me to the overall domination we did get from Oduro throughout the game. As it was happening and as Travis was going through, TJ Hargrove, Javon Pickett, Jake Forrester, Francis Okoro, just throwing every body he could at Oduro, and then finally maybe going to the zone to kind of mix it up a little bit. What was your takeaway from the Billikens defense and how good of a game Oduro as a big man had against them?
Well, that's 2 games in a row that he's scoring 30 against SLU, and I think it just highlights that an athletic power forward who can play outside in, can slash and do things physically, and has a nice touch, going to present a problem. I'm telling you, for a couple of decades, the Billikens could not match up with athletic 3 men. And then Dwayne Evans came in back in the Majerus days and kind of changed that. Now it seems like it's the really athletic 4-man that is plaguing the Bills because we've had some good bigs. We've had some good 5s, at least defensively, and we do now. But it's the 4-man that I think might be a little bit of a chink in the armor.
Yeah, potentially. I mean, you saw the game Venning also had for the Bonnies, against SLU just 1 game before. So the big men have had 2 big games, and I think, that's been tough. I think, though, the thing to focus on is that in the clutch moments of both of those games, when the games really needed to kind of turn on a dime, it was a lot earlier in the game in the Bonnies game and a lot later in the George Mason game, but there were still those moments. They were able to flummox those guys, and they weren't able to get shots off, or they had bad turnovers in the paint. And so what they can do against these big men across a full game, it's certainly problematic right now, but I think we've seen some bright spots. Obviously, a lot of people were looking forward to the Dayton game. By the way, Dayton last night losing their first conference game of the year against VCU by 1 point, very close game. But you look at Kamara, and you look at Holmes, and people are already wondering as SLU fans, how are the Billikens going to match up against Dayton when that comes around? And I think there's little things you can see. They're playing this drop coverage that I actually think it really accentuates both Jake Forrester and Francis Okoro's skills on the court. But what you're seeing is more help and more kind of, guys coming in and swiping and jumping back out. The biggest question, I think, when the Bills go against Dayton, and the biggest question from here on out until we see something different, if there's a good big man on a team, the biggest question you have to ask yourself as a Billiken fan is, how is the outside shooting on that team? Because if it's the Bonnies and it's not very strong, you watch the Bonnies tape and it's a lot of help defense. It's a lot of just throwing hands.
That's right.
It's throwing bodies and hands and bending space to just kind of mess them up a little bit. They did that against George Mason, but George Mason, a better 3-point shooting team for the season, especially with a guy like Victor Bailey, they weren't as aggressive with that. But as George Mason struggled at different points in the game, they were able to come off certain shooters and do it. And I think that's when they were able to kind of, rattle Oduro a little bit. I think it's a good sign overall that the Billikens coaching staff is willing to make these adjustments in game. I think that's the biggest thing I look for in a coaching staff, not just their overall game plan, but can you change it the classical, every plan survive, no plan survives first contact with the enemy. Can you make those adjustments after they make their counters, or in the case of the George Mason game for a little bit, if you listen to Yuri Collins, maybe show you something you weren't 100% prepared for.
The other thing that I think complements the defensive game plan, certainly in the last few games, is that Yuri Collins, already an all-league defender, has elevated it again, holding a 30-point score to 1 point. And then what he did to the lefty shooter from Mason, just shut him down. When you've got a shutdown defender against the best guy on the other team, or one of the best scorers on the other team, it allows the rest of your defensive game plan to be executed properly. When your bigger guys, 6'5" to 6'10", or you got multiple scorers there, Yuri's not going to be able to do much there defensively. So those are the kind of matchups you got to keep an eye on.
Absolutely. And let's go ahead and transfer, because it's going to be a short episode today, to today's matchup against the George Washington Colonials. Right off the bat, when you look at GW, the big thing that jumps out is that they have a big-time scorer in James Bishop. But obviously, if you've been watching the SLU games and you just brought it up, you think, well, Yuri, number 1 versus number 11, that's going to be something we see throughout the entire game. So the question kind of like, you go down the roster and now becomes, well, will Gibson Jimerson, Javante Perker, Javon Pickett, so on and so forth, will they be able to hold back a 17-point score in Brendan Adams? And will Okoro be able to then hold down their one of their big men in Ricky Lindo, who's about almost a double-double player? So those, I think, are the big questions jumping right into this George Washington matchup. And I think it's going to come right to, what defensive scheme we see from the big man, and then constantly what we've talked about. Gibson Jimerson, Javante Perkins, Sincere Parker, those guys, how are they playing as auxiliary defenders on what is essentially a second or third option?
The other thing to look at, and it ties together, is that both of these are the top 2 scoring teams in the league. They both want to get out. They both want to score in the 80s. So you've got to have shots fall. Even if you say we're going to really be focused on defense, that they're going to score at X level, whatever that is. Let's say they're scoring 80, you hold them to 69 points. Hey, that's tremendous. But you've still got to score your points too. So this is going to be, I think, a game that will be decided by who can dictate pace.
Absolutely. And man, it is insane, the run of scores that St. Louis had to face, especially when you just look at the conference scoring. Because Bishop, again, he's a guy, you look at him total year, he's at about 22. But you look at just his conference play across 3 games, and he's got 93 points scored, 91 points scored. He's averaging 30 a game again. So again, I think this is going to be a perfect game to watch off the ball, which I think is so tricky sometimes as casual fans. Number 11 and number 1 are going to be locked in the entire game. This is going to be another one. If the last 2 games you heard about it, but you weren't able to lock into Yuri and watch him on Carl Banks and watch him on Victor Bailey Jr., do it today against James Bishop, because that matchup is going to be crucial the whole game for the Billikens defense. And I think that's going to be a fun one for you and Earl to kind of track throughout the game as well.
It absolutely will. And then they have several players that love to slash and drive and get to the rim. That has been a consistent problem for the Billikens. It's a problem for everybody, but it's been a real problem for the Billikens. So can you contain that and make their shooters uncomfortable? In their own building, can you make their offense be uncomfortable? It's quite a challenge, but I think that's the big one today.
And then my other thing, when we look from defense to offense really quickly, because I think a lot of people came away not 100% enthused with the offense after the George Mason game. It's every time I watch this SLU offense, what sticks out to me is the droughts when they don't score are different than last year. And I think George Mason was a good example of that, which they have. When the droughts this year happen, it's 2 or 3 plays and Yuri's dribbling the entire time and no one's moving. But it's completely just like everyone just kind of like goes brain dead for 3 offensive possessions. Last year, though, it was 7 or 8 possession stretches where guys were moving, but there was nothing dangerous happening where the defense actually had to be bent out of shape. That's something I think we've seen cut down. I think Travis has done a much better job this year of adding more and more stuff. And while I was critical of maybe them trying too much of the same stuff over and over that wasn't working against George Mason, you watch Javonte Perkins, you watch Gibson Jimerson offensively, and just watch how many times they set up little 2 or 3 man sets in the corner where 2 guys are screening for each other, one guy rolls off, and then the other guy rolls off the other guy's screen. There's a lot of that action that I don't think we saw over the last 2 years with Travis Ford. That's here this year. It's not being executed at 100%, but I'm really impressed with just the amount of different kind of looks and sets Travis is putting in, especially when if you listen to him describe it, a lot of these sets are an organic thing that's happening out of their flow offense that these guys are just having to kind of come up with on the fly because they work with it so much. It hasn't come together and put up the numbers we expected from the beginning of the season, but I think the criticisms against Travis's offense this year aren't as legitimate as I would have thought last year. And I'm not nearly as agreeable as I was last year with that. I actually love the actions they're doing, and I think today against a more open game could be a good example of that.
2 points. For those who are critical, did they expect the Bills to score 100 a game? They're scoring 80.
Yeah.
Come on. Actually, I think it's down to about 77.
About that, yeah.
77. So I thought they'd be scoring about 10 more a game.
Mm-hmm.
But then go look at the individual numbers, and you can see where those 10 points would have come from. And so I think that was a reasonable expectation. You'd like to think you can find different combinations in the offense to get those 10 points back. The other thing, I'm glad you brought up those curls. I know for a fact that the Bills are trying to emphasize, I think they call them 3 curl and 4 curl, where the 3 and 4 men are coming underneath, coming around those screens on the opposite block and coming up into that mid-range area for a shot. And usually it's the second guy that's able to get open for the shot. So I think you're right on top of it with recognizing those screens. And I think that will be a real focus today as well.
Absolutely. All right, Rammer, you got to get to the game. You got some work to do today for between the Billikens and the Colonials. I'll stay on here. I'll tell everybody about Royal Banks. I'll tell everybody about Munganess. You get out of here, Rammer. You have a great day at the game.
Thanks, buddy. See
you later, Rammer. You have a good one. And that is Bob Ramsey, play-by-play man for the Billikens. That is our show for today on the 2-man game. We're going to be back here early next week to break down this GW game. We also got a lot more things coming with some breakdowns of the George Mason game a little deeper. I know a lot of people wanted a little bit more, especially with everything I'm saying about the offense. So we're going to give you more of that. We got a lot of great things coming up here on 2-man game and Claves Online. So stay tuned. Have fun watching the GW game. You can follow me at ROCC ESPN if you want to hear my thoughts during the SLU game. Also, of course, tune into Rammer and Earl on KMOX as they broadcast the game as they always do, doing such an incredible job. This has been the 2-man game on Claves Online. Have a great weekend, St. Louis.
From our roots in St. Louis, Royal Banks of Missouri is brand. From our roots in St. Louis, Royal Banks of Missouri.
St. Louis Acura has an unbeatable selection of new and pre-owned vehicles. We have a great selection of over 175 pre-owned and factory precision certified with finance rates as low as 0.99% for 36 months with approved credit. We also have over 250 new Acura models arriving this year, and Acura loyalty rebates up to $1,000 on select new Acura models. St. Louis Acura remains committed to becoming better than ever for you.
From our roots in St. Louis, Royal Banks of Missouri is branching out to continue serving you with our locations in St. Charles, Jerseyville, Granite City, and now in Hannibal, Center, and New London. Royal Banks of Missouri, the community bank in your community.